Good evening and welcome to AmericanMantics. It is August 27th, Friday evening, and that is of 2021. We are here with you this evening talking about American death and struggle. And one of the things that you see right on your screen to start with is about gun violence epidemic, which is killing more children more often, it says. Although one thing I do want to note, just as important as the death that we're experiencing is our general plight and the things that we all notice and notice all of the time. For example, I've searched here for recent child murders of 2020. I wanted to know how many children were murdered in the United States in the year 2020. And, of course, that would be a general number. That would be virtually there's a number for killed people. And I'm guessing there would be a number for killed children. All I was able to find in my preliminary search here, without digging deeper, but obviously not easy to find, was related to the political issue of guns. And so when I was seeing and running into specifically the things that are talking either irrelevant or talking about specific murders of children here or there, what I would run into otherwise were children that lists like this, where children there was no explanation as to the number of children that were murdered. So there's no way that in 1950 there's just that number and then that's it. And then if you take that up to and this is decades, and that's it. Just this number of murdered children in that recent decade. That's it. That's all there is. Now, don't get me wrong. Even one is too much. But we know with the number of children that have gone missing and reported missing since the last 100 years, it would be more than enough to fill a school bus, I would imagine. In any event, that's what our records here are showing when it comes to children deaths. It's either an underreported number or it's representation of gun violence, meaning that it goes back to guns, which is more of a political issue and hard to trust, if you ask me. And you'll be shocked at the number of these that just do that. So, I went ahead and searched out some other terms as well. Florida's overall crime rate. Like I said, this isn't just murders, but we're talking about human death and in the many ways that we are dying. We'll get into that important topic in this episode. And the reason why we're doing this is because so many people suffer as the result of greed hell, and it's often misappropriated as to what's causing it. What AmericanMantics will do and attempt to do as we move forward is consistently tie the evidence with the outcome and the reason with that which we see commence in a variety of ways. We tie those things together because later when we are talking about AmericanMantics and the need of AmericanMantics to take over from greed hell, that we can do our free market economy, we can do our democracy, we can do everything we have ever done, only better, because we don't have greed hell causing so much mischief. And when you start dividing up human death and suffering, along with the causes, the things, our ways and means of doing things, meaning greed hell itself, and the struggles people are having the poverty that we see, the justice system that often doles out justice for some but not for all, and corruption ruling the day. Our justice system is overcome by corruption just as it is anything else. We get to see this because our facts record it. We talk about it in our news reports. It's documented, but pulling it together and realizing what's causing all of these things, that is what our major problem is these days. We're not bringing together the causes of all of this human suffering. The reason why people are dealing with drug addiction and dying. And you see the kind of freedom people are living. It's like they're in a rush to hurry up and live it before something takes them away from that which they love to do. You'll see there's a consistent rush that pervades to take over the human soul in its ability to enjoy its life, to have experiences with the people they love. And instead, there are masses of people convinced that the way life is best lived is falling into a habit, a pattern, that each day requires them to show up to a building, whether they're needed or not, to show up and receive a check, and that by doing that they earn their right to life. In fact, it's called to earn a living. This is something that I am completely convinced is backwards thinking. Not because of the notion that people shouldn't pull their weight or play their part. It's because that we say, in order for you to matter, you must do this. That's not how we do it in our families. When someone's sick, when there's something wrong, when someone's having a bad day, we do our best to be there for those folks. And often it's this world that doesn't accept those excuses that cause that to come to an end. People can no longer be there for each other. I've said in previous episodes, and it remains true, that Greed Hell's number one goal for humanity is to checkmate humanity. It's rather unfortunate that that's what Greed Hell's goal is, because it's making fast progress and it's keeping people none the wiser. That's part of Greed Hell's power. It's part of its allure, is that it entices you with promises it cannot keep, it does not intend to keep, but then it puts you in fear to stay in gear. That is Greed Hell's method. It's its methodology. It's how it wins. Humanity has effectively been put into checkmate by a force that I call as Greed Hell. There's no other way to put it. It's massive greed through the human soul that's causing Greed Hell to persist. And it's the way we've been taught. It's a spiritual battle, I do believe, that takes place in the human heart. And if you can feel it yourself and acknowledge the truth, you just might recognize it. That the good versus the evil in this world is a real battle. It's more than pervasive. It's the only battle that matters. Everything else is caused because of this, getting this one wrong. Namely, in that we do not identify it, we do not recognize it, and it continues to do what it's always done. And its number one objective is human death, as we talked about, death for humanity, and to suffer on the way. to not have good experiences, to not have care running their lives. So it's to dampen human value and heighten human suffering all the way on to human death. And for whom? For all. It doesn't matter if you're Meaty McGreedy or if you are the guy living off the dumpster. Death is coming for you. And it comes for you in a variety of ways. To pretend that this is not happening is to put ourselves in danger from the death that is fast approaching. Your children and your children's children will surely have to deal with this in ways that you never thought even possible, because it's a problem that gets exponentially worse as time goes on. So often when I speak to people in my previous programs and talk about, well, I'd hate to see you being one of the people standing in the rubble after folks like me have done our best on the front lines to do what we can in order to stop this trajectory, that now maybe that picture is becoming a little bit more clear of what I mean. For those that are doing most of the greed, they will most likely live the longest because they always watch out for numero uno, themselves. And so they'll be the ones standing in the rubble the latest to see the worst. They thought the promise was going to work for them, but I assure you, if you're one of these people, I love you. We're together in this battle. And you are in a great situation of great advantage. Nobody's telling you to remove your advantage, but it's important to recognize your place in this world for your own survival and for all of our survival. For you to have a better life is for other people to experience the goodness that you've experienced, and that makes your life better. You know it does, because of how lonely all of the parties you go to are and the types of people that arrive there. You know that every time you've ever had an extramarital crush, it's always been on somebody usually younger and more rambunctious and more courageous, living a life that you wish you could. You're locked in a life. You can't get out of it. It's like being in a jail cell, except for in your own class. To be freed from that would be a dream. But what has you locked down is fear. The fear that should you do anything wrong, you'll be among the class who are suffering the worst, unable to buy the food they need to survive. They have to think on a daily basis about where that day's sustenance comes from. You don't want to be among that crowd. So you defend the whole system to remain at the level you are at, your own misery and its misery. And death is coming for you. And you already know it. And all facts point to that direction. We know that the people under you resent you for your success. They're coming after you. We know the people over you are hunting you down, trying to keep you in line because you're coming for them. That's just how it is in greed hell. And you know it. And you always have to be advancing, taking somebody else out so that you could fill their position. For every success in greed hell, there's so many other failures. You already know this. You've lived it. Tell me how it's not true. Because I've seen it myself. And the fakeness among people. You can't go to dinner with your best friend without first thinking in your own mind, who will pay for it? That's how much greed has gotten in between human relationships within your world. That's because you can't afford to truly think about love and to just let go. You've learned early on that to have so much in this life, You better hamper in that loving clock, huh? You better keep that within arm's reach, because so many people are in need, and they'll be happy to take what you have. Greed runs between all people, however. It's not just the rich. We see people who are suffering and without, and willing to kill each other over a loaf of bread. That's what greed is after. That human misery, bringing out the survival instinct within man, instead of allowing man to advance. When we're talking about an income for all, they sell it to you as some sort of freebie, but that's not what's happening. What's happening is we are advancing. We are receiving God's gift. And if we don't accept the gift, surely, just as we have in previous dark times, we'll have another dark ages. Except for this one, it'll be hard to support 8 billion mouths doing things the way we did things 1,000 years ago. So we better start focusing on what's right, or greed hell is about to take billions of people off of this planet. Well, we're going to go on to current news story we have up here. We're going to move it on off as we discussed it. And instead, I want to talk about, and we'll come back to these other statistics, Black Swan events. Excuse me. Now, the Black Swan theory, or the Black Swan event, is a metaphor that describes the event that comes as a surprise. Has a major effect and is often inappropriately rationalized after the fact with the benefit of hindsight. Oh, we knew that was coming. Yeah. It was inevitable. Everybody's seen it happening. But nobody did anything about it. And that's why they say in hindsight, it just doesn't even matter. To understand that we deal with two sets of problems in this world is to understand the truth around us. God has it written all around us, as it turns out. And that's just how I see the truth. When I see two drunk guys about to harass some girl standing on a corner, that's God's truth telling me what's about to happen. I've seen this type of behavior before from people who were acting out of rage and not in control. And that's what being drunk is what I've learned from the beatings from my father. So when I see that, I sense what's practical in that situation. I've seen that evil before. And most of us have. And for those of us who haven't, we have heard about it from those who have, and we know what's about to occur. Black Swan events can be life-ending events. They could even be life-altering events. And we have often feared things from happening that never materialized. And other times we have talked about the possibility of something happen, but never actually prepared for those things. And then they have happened. going back to the two types of problems there are. We have man-made problems, where the problem never had to exist, but only exists because of man's ineptability to handle that problem, either as a whole or by him or herself. They create these problems, but they're unable to deal with them. And then we have nature's problems that occur and can cause death to all life, actually. We've seen this in the extinction of dinosaurs. These facts, our knowledge, the archaeology we've done to discover that which we know to be factual today, all tells us God's truth. He's talking to us, That truth matters. In love, it shows us the way, because in every situation, it gives our compassion the clue of what we should do. Coupled with that truth we already know about, it would have us prepare for these types of black swan events that later are always spoken about, but truly we never had the advantage to do anything about because we already knew about it and already decided to do nothing about it. I've brought this up in previous AmericanMantics episodes, in that Yellowstone is such one of these places. You might live within that area in the Midwest, and should you be in the Yellowstone area, well then you've heard about it. This is a real threat. And when science tells us that this can go and it's overdue, but that by being overdue for Yellowstone to erupt, it gives us a window of, hundreds of years, not days or months or weeks, well then it means we take shortcuts. Maybe it's in 200 years from now. We have bigger problems we have to address now. And that's how humanity justifies it. But it's never really fully unknown, is it? These are the known black swan events we do nothing about. And they kill people. Now let's get back to the many other things that we do nothing about that kills people. "2020 saw unprecedented murder spike in major U.S. cities, and time now is 7:41. In late December, the Associated Press reported that 2020 was on track to become the deadliest year in U.S. history, with the total number of deaths forecasted to rise 15% compared to 2019, primarily due to the coronavirus pandemic. There were also several other smaller contributory factors, however, including higher death tolls from heart and circulatory diseases, as well as the country's opioid crisis. That's because so many people are in depression, they take their favorite opioid to get a relief from that major depression for just that moment, and then deal with a lifetime crisis of opioid addiction doled out to them by their doctors quite often. In the interest of profit, it always leads back to greed, my friends, my family, my lovers. Don't you know I have experience with all of these things? And it's funny how many of us do. The U.S. also experienced its most violent year in decades, with an unprecedented rise in homicides. The gun violence archive reported that more than 19,000 people have died in shootings or firearm-related incidents in 2020, the highest figure in 2 decades. While it doesn't mention the extra part, I will. And that is yet just a small number of the overall deaths that could have been avoided, but that by greed hell we will never get taken care of unless we deal with greed itself. And should we, then we'll realize this is a human problem and not a gun problem. That our spirits are hurting, that people are depressed, and they're doing awful things, and oftentimes to themselves. New Orleans-based crime analyst Jeff Asher took a closer look at the number of murders in 57 major American cities, and he found that the number of offenses grew in 51 of them. He only focused on agencies where data was available, and most of them had figures through November or December of 2020. Growth in violent crime varied by city, with Seattle seeing a 74% spike in homicides between 2019 and 2020, while Chicago and Boston saw their offenses grow 55% and 54% respectively. Elsewhere, Washington, D.C. and Las Vegas saw growth in their numbers of offenses, albeit at a slower pace, less than 20%. So where death is more pervasive, it persists in greater numbers. That does not shock your happy healer lover at all, as what we see occurring is greed hell is spreading its tentacles in all areas, and where there is more crime, there is more greed that is running the show. Remember, this crime is a result of greed itself. When you don't take care of people, and you live in a world where taking care of people is possible and obvious by all other people, then this is what you get. It's just basic arithmetic, logic, common sense, scientific, really. New York's homicide count went up by nearly 40%, with Mayor Bill de Blasio stating that the figures should worry all New Yorkers, and it has to stop. He attributed the situation in part to the coronavirus and the fact that people are cooped up, according to the NPR, adding that it's certainly related to the fact that criminal justice system is on pause, and that's causing a lot of problems. I don't see it mentioned in there where the criminal justice system itself is the cause to human suffering, getting justice wrong, often getting corruption just right. And that the people during this coronavirus who are cooped in surely do face additional problems, and we're going to get to that next. The many diseases we're suffering from while scientists aren't doing their best, while funding is not provided for scientists to do their best, and while more people get in finance, and then corruption, of course, and less people are getting into science and medical discovery and determining a new future for humanity where there's not so much suffering and there's more science and technological solutions to human suffering. In areas where we do see this, often we see, oh, there it is again, that corruption. And of course, you know Theranos and the story where they planned on taking just a blood prick amount of blood to be able to do a full range of tests on diseases that go from A to Z, and determining what people are dealing with as quickly as showing up at your local Walgreens. It felt like a forward-thinking time that we're making progress. And what did people use that for? To take advantage and to steal. That is what greed hell does. And it teaches for people to do that all the whole way. earlier. We spoke today in the morning show. We spoke about what it takes for people to become that way. You should see that show. It's a good one. The rise in homicide has not been confined to cities, and Asher says the problem is also increasingly rural. He told NPR the numbers for 2020 are by no means final, and that the official end-of-year statistics will tell a startlingly grim story. He also said that the United States is on course for the largest one-year rise in its murder count ever recorded. Here we have a graph, and this is the 2020 saw unprecedented murder spikes in major U.S. cities, percentage change in homicides in selected U.S. cities as between 2019 and 2020. And we'll just go over this list quite frankly. We see Seattle is raged 74% for more human deaths. New Orleans, Atlanta, Chicago, Boston, Portland, all from 50 to 60% increased deaths. Houston, New York, from 40 to 39.2 to 42% deaths. And then New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., and Las Vegas from 14% and on up. Unbelievable. All increase in death rates from homicide, specifically. Okay, let us move to another graph, shall we? Oh, excuse me. We just spoke about that. Another graph. These are causes of deaths from 15 to 49-year-olds worldwide for the year 2017. Now, what I'm going to do is I've got to put something down here for a moment. I'm going to zoom in on what we're looking at here. First, we see cardiovascular deaths. So make sure this is... Are we getting it right? Okay, and we have cardiovascular deaths at 1.26 million for the year 2017. Cancer comes in second at 1.05 million. Between cancer and cardiovascular deaths alone, we have over 2.26 million deaths per year, and those are of the people who have been documented. I'm certain there are a lot more that have not been documented, like people who have been attributed to their death of old age. And cardiovascular systems, should they have been healthier, perhaps would have lived longer. So this number, even as high as it is to me, is a bit skewed to the low side. These are based on actual reportings, not actual amount. HIV and AIDS comes right after those two. 676,000 deaths. Road accidents, 700,000. Well, 669,000, I'm sorry. Digestive diseases, think about that, digestive diseases, 478,000. Suicides, a ton of suicides, for considering all of the other problems that are causing humanity to die. Now we have a mental one, and mental diseases are just as prevalent and important as anything else. This isn't of people that are suffering with something that couldn't have been dealt with, that they kill themselves. It's because of their outlook on the world. It's the things that people who are successful in this world did accept that those people could not accept or do or manage in some way, shape, form, or fashion that led to them and their decision of having taken up suicide as the final act. Trust me, folks, the problem is not so clear. You think you know it all. You think so many people that are telling you as the problem is that they know it all. The good news is that by these folks who do not know it all means that there's hope found in there, because many of these problems are reported as having no solutions, which is why we accept it. It's just one of greed hell's lies. It's another lie, in fact. Greed hell has so many lies, and I say you should know the force by its acts. And greed hell is cunning. It tricks, and we talk about in the ways it tricks, and people often act through fear and through greed. Those are the things that move the world, and they move the stock market. At home, we would like to think love moves our actions, but even there we see divorce caused mostly by monetary reasons. These are all of the human suffering problems that we do not address, and we make pretend they are other issues instead that keep people continuing to suffer. People who think they understand what the right prescription is, but later find themselves the divorcee to a wife who decided that that husband could no longer meet her requirements as a wife. It's the truth. I met a man who was I have all this stuff down on record, so surely when you see this stuff, you'll understand in the past and my lessons to you and my experiences as they have been explained to you, and why those conversations exist, and more meaning as to what they mean by the time they get onto AmericanMantics. But don't you know this is a pervasive problem? And I talked to a man who said that he had it all. He was running on full spectrum life. He had it all in his view. Of course, later he realized that wasn't true. Millions of dollars, a great social standing, respected in his community, and wealthy. Homes here and homes there. Multiple cars, a happy wife, and happy children. Fast forward, well, he never thought he would see his life where he was divorced, living out of a car, by himself, ostracized by his family, and all due to money problems. That's right. And that's what the fear is. That's how greed hell keeps its people in line, and it keeps the lie going, and it keeps the problem persisting. But yet that doesn't need to be the case. And again, knowledge is power. That's why we talk about this stuff. So suicides. And then you have tubercular sclerosis, liver disease, homicide. We have lower respiratory infections, respiratory disease, kidney disease, diarrheas, diabetes, malaria, which, by the way, we have so many different ways of dealing with a lot of these problems that we just don't offer people because they don't matter. They don't have enough money, so they can't afford to matter. Drowning, drug overdose, alcohol disorder, hepatitis, fire, nutritional deficiencies. This seems to me so retarded. Even Americans themselves don't know about their machinery, that which is their body. They get confused because they are their soul, honestly. And the body just seems like it should be automatic. They forget that they have to take in certain nutrients, and nobody tells them either. This results in really bad outcomes, and nobody explains to them the scientific reasoning behind our creation, behind our need for different nutrients, and our scientific ability to overcome these problems. And often people don't understand the grave need to understand these issues in the first place. They often think, oh, that's just science, something to be ignored. and it's not given enough consideration. People ultimately do wrong because they were not aware. And it's true. So carrying on, malaria, then we have drowning. My nephew almost drowned. It's really sad, right? Drug overdose. Now that's something I know about. I had a brother who died from a drug overdose. I had another brother who was not a druggie in any sense of the word, but rather his girlfriend was, and she injected into him ultimately the overdose that he experienced. And then he went and dealt with other things from the hospital, and that didn't even kill him because, like I said, he wasn't the drug type, but he did ultimately from that needle. It wasn't even an overdose so much, it was that a dirty needle that she had put into him, and it caused him to get sepsis, a blood disease, and it's caused him so much pain and suffering, almost 3 months in the hospital of coming in, coming out. Now, a lot of the problems were brought on by the hospital itself. So as your girlfriend stabs you in the back in a way that's just inhumane, she was always after his money, the wrong things. Again, getting focused back on to how greed causes all problems. No matter what the problem is, you could always cause it back to greed. Realize that. The truth is astounding. Whether it's corruption, somebody trying to get one over on someone else, whether it was my brother's girlfriend who shot him up with a dirty needle, or whether it was the hospital itself who put a hole in his throat that he did not need because they were basically washing him off. They were assuming him to be a goner, and what he was not, a drug addict. They were assuming because of the nature of the reason why he was there that he was a lost cause, though he was not. They did not realize how strong he was. He was the strongest of all of us children. We were trying to explain to him, of my mother's children, we were trying to explain to them this fact that he was not an addict, that he was very strong, do not count him out, and that they were counting him out. And eventually they said to save his life, they had to put this hole there. But really they were putting that there because they expected him to be in a long and protruded state of like Sherry, that woman who fell in a coma and never woke up out of it for years. They expected that to be my brother's plight. Indeed, that was not my brother's plight. He woke up the very next day after they put this hole in his throat, after they lied to us saying that he needed it. That in itself still wasn't enough to kill my brother. Just like a plane accident, often there's many things that led up to the reason why it happened. The same is true with my brother's death when it comes to this hospital. Now, they should have considered the care my brother would need and the additional care and cleaning and taking care of it, his wound in a better way. Now, you'll see coverage in the future of us complaining and hoping and wishing and pleading with this hospital to do a better job with my brother in their sanitary conditioning for patients in that hospital was not up to par, and our brother was losing his battle because they were not doing their jobs. And we told them, if not no less than 100 times over that 90-day approximate period, we haven't told them once. It was a daily ritual. We were feeling so put off by this problem, we tried our hardest to get him moved to another hospital. And then it became, again, greed, liability, that they didn't want to move him to another hospital. Why, they're certainly capable of handling it, except for they won't do what we're asking. They won't give him an increased level of care that'll save his life, namely because of cost. And again, greed. There's so many things that point back to greed as being the problem. Oh, well, Keith, if we did things better, do you know how much that would cost? Now you're doing it. They taught us all to be like that. That is the problem in greed hell. It's so completely obvious. And so it ends there with Parkinson's disease, natural disasters, which we talk about often. And all of this stuff can be considered nature's threats to humanity. And we didn't even get into the natural disaster aspect of what that is. Well, a little bit. We got into Yellowstone, so that's volcanoes. And there's all kinds of other threats, hurricanes, and we have tornadoes, well, all sorts of weather, including we have global warming to concern about the rising of the seas and cities falling beneath the sea level. And then, of course, we have, the list just goes on, my friends, and all of it's brought on either by natural occurrences and then perpetuated by greed's lack of care. And the lack of care part is a force. Greed itself is a force, and just like love is. I've done the math. I've studied on this for a long time. They are the two forces that keep human beings active. Either we act out of greed. That's what we only move for a couple of reasons. We're hungry, or we're loving something, what we've convinced ourselves we need, and in the interest of survival, and the interest of love. And greed often has us deciding who's on our side and who do we need to compete with for resources. And love decides who's worthy of being on our side. Now, through human development, the smarter we've become in our capacity to deal with these natural disasters, coupled with our own greed is a disaster it is itself. We have become better and more capable of dealing with our resolve is all that lacks, because we're more than capable of dealing with a lot of these problems through what tells us this? God's truth. Again, it goes back to where we start. We look out there, we see the truth around us. We don't let other people tell us what the truth is, because we already know in greed hell, too many people are willing to mislead us for their own agenda, for their own benefit. And we already seen how cunning greed hell could be. We see how much it leaves its own self out, and there's so much human death and dying. We see that those who have amounted to the greatest amount of greed are the ones who are surviving, and that the lovers are the ones who that can't do it so well, who that are more apprehensive in doing it. And of course, the early bird gets the worm. He who jumps on greed first lives longest. So people aren't just doing greed, they're jumping at the opportunity to do it. That is the world we live in today. And yet also we are in the world, and the truth around us tells us that our science has brought us to an ability to overcome this world, and that we have the will. That's what separates humanity ultimately from the animals, that we are sentinel beings, that we could think our way through problems. And I'm letting it run over on purpose a little bit today, because we got started a little bit later. And it's always my intent to give you at least 50 minutes or so of quality content based on AmericanMantics values, teachings, and virtues, the romantic system of love that can bring us, humanity, from our knees to a prosperous happiness and the world of abundance, taking care of ourselves and taking care of each other. And that's what I'm certain of. So that's constantly what I've always promised you out of this program, is the contrast and comparison between those two worlds. I'm committed to a lifetime of only making that message stronger and only making that truth show out more. I am convinced that the more greed hell takes us off this ledge, that the more this truth I speak about will be valued, will be tolerated, and will be sought, because it will have the greatest way out of this hell. No longer can greed sustain. No longer can greed fill in the edges. Greed at this point has become so greedy that it's getting sloppy. It's outright and just doing it in front of the people that it used propaganda on to fool in the first place. At this point, it expects those people to be begging for their lives, but instead, love has come to show up to the party early and telling these people the truth and hoping that somehow we can change our trajectory to the death that is greed hell. Folks, we'll see you next week on Monday. God bless you. I love you. I am your Happy Healer lover, and we're going to end it here. Good night.